Good morning, friends. Welcome back to Writer's Circle. Happy birthday, Rochelle. We've got a happy birthday to Rochelle, a yesterday birthday to Leslie. We've got birthdays up the wazoo in the community this week. I love
It
it.
was my
Couple
son's
more.
4 month birthday the other day.
Oh my goodness. Here's for February. Cheers, everybody. Ah, let's just do a quick check-in. What did you set for yourself last week? Where are we today? And then we'll dive into the actual communication of what we're going to cover today. Deal? Who's got anything to report besides being a couple days older and a couple days wiser? As you please. I see both of you.
Um, I'll start. So ever since creating my mind map, um, I still need to work on my outline, but ever since creating my mind map, I feel like it already shifted a direction for me with the themes that I want to do for my writing. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. So a mind map win. Great. Good. And definitely it's like mind map helps you make an outline, helps you do the next thing, right? So awesome. Leslie.
I did not succeed this week in reaching my goals, but you know, it just was one of those weeks where I took some self-care time, some downtime.
Awesome.
Yeah, so back to try to figure out how the heck to edit
Mm,
appropriately without just judging myself on every sentence and all
mm,
that. So I'm looking for some ideas of um similar to the outline.
mhm.
Is there a way to edit
The
very
hacks.
succinctly? So
Yes.
that's my question today.
Okay, cool.
So,
Good. Let's get to that. We will. Thanks for bringing it up. Um, it's emotional or it's not the logistics of it, it's the emotions of it?
oh, it's both. I think
Okay.
the logistics for sure,
Okay.
but then just kind of keeping my head out of it,
Okay.
for starters, because I think it's
Cool.
always going to be like, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, the same way, like listening to my own voice, I'm like, is that really what I sound like? Other people have to hear this? Oh my God. The same way when I'm reading my own words, I'm like, ooh, right? Like I want it to be better, but I don't know how to make it better. That kind of thing. So awesome. It's on the list. Jennifer.
So my goal for this week was to redo my mind map. And basically what I did was write a second mind map that I also don't like and kind of know what direction I don't want to go in with it. So I guess that's something. I came across a quote this week that I like, and it's by Shirley Jackson, and it's a confused reader is an antagonistic reader. So
Hmm.
that motivates me to want to make it extra clear exactly what I'm trying to do
Okay.
to avoid going off on tangents and having the reader have to do too much work to keep up with what it
Mhm.
is I'm trying to say.
Yep. I love that. I'd like to add my instant reaction is certainly at the beginning, sometimes we're still figuring out what it is that we're doing. And one of the reasons I like this system so much is this is the thing in front of you, this is the focus, this is the task, and this is the goal. Don't worry if there's other stuff that will need to be cleaned up or sorted out later, right? Because I love that quote, and I think that quote's really good in some of the editing stages and lightly good in the outlining. How am I getting my reader from here to here? But then I make a mess all the way through. And we call it the messy middle for the emotional reasons. We call it the messy middle for the writing reasons. Um, all of that. Let's just make sure we're not holding ourselves to impossibly high standards at
Right. We
any
don't want
time,
the
but especially too
perfectionism to
early,
keep us from making progress.
right? Because in a mind map, yes, we understand we want our reader to have uh, understanding of how we get from A to B to C. And Stace, I think you mentioned this before, but we can have anybody step from any idea to any other idea if we tell them what our connection is, what the link is. I'm showing you this, and then I'm going to show you this. And the reason I'm showing you this next is because, right?
I call that the Dora the Explorer way of doing things.
What we're
'Cause that's
pulling
the-
out of the backpack,
We're
right?
going to go to here, and then we're going to here.
Right. And we can, I could give anybody 3 different things. We could put them in any order and explain why the order. And every reader would be like, yep, sure. But again, if I love the sort of emptying out your purse metaphor, which is very much mind map of like, I'm just going to take everything I have, turn it upside down and shake it out. There's no order, there's no logic. Like, why are there 3 chapsticks in there? Well, there are because da, da, da. That's the rough draft, or that's the mind map. And then we're like, what do we want in there? And what order do we want to experience things? Right. And what do we want our reader to have? A lot. No matter how many times you write a book, but certainly the first time, there's a lot of figuring out. There's a lot of, I don't know. What happens if I do this in this order? What happens if I change the order? What do I need to put in between this and this so that that non-antagonistic experience happens for the reader, like Jennifer mentioned in the quote? Like, we certainly don't want to be pissing off our readers either with the content necessarily, but certainly not the structure, right? We don't want to piss them off and confuse them and make them feel out of place. Having that as an awareness is great. I was meeting with somebody the other day, just yesterday. Okay. And I, of course, you love it. I pulled out the Post-it. I gave her the core message framework that we talk about in the workshop. I handed it to her. And then she's like, yeah, good. But should I have a new social media platform? Okay. Good question. Great question. Not a great question today, right? It was one of those like, I'm going to throw myself 10 miles down the road and focus on that stuff so that I don't actually have to answer the questions that are right in front of me. And so, yes, there's going to be a right time and a right place for every single question. And Jennifer, I think the quote is relevant at a couple of different stages. But what I watched this woman do was throw herself a year into the future so that the thing that was like right in front of her, I call this productive procrastination. So if you're like, I'm doing something, it makes me feel like I'm doing something, and it's really helping me avoid the thing in front of me, chances are it's productive procrastination. So take each piece of advice, even stuff you get from me, and just decide how much. Is it a teaspoon that you're going to take today, or a tablespoon, or a gallon, right? In the editing stage, I would take a gallon of that quote. In the mind mapping and outlining stage, I would take a teaspoon. Just a tiny bit. Yep, still true, but on this scale. Yeah, I love it. I hope that makes sense. Makes sense? Okay. Other folks checking in. Progress, not progress. I think self-care is certainly progress. There's lots of different ways to move our thing along. Rest is part of it. Stepping back from our work is part of doing our work. I host an in-person writing group from time to time. So we had like 8 people take over a coffee shop on Friday and write for a couple of hours. That was my progress. I opened my book file for the first time in like 4 weeks, and that felt like progress. I read it and I was like, oh, I really thought it was. So Leslie, this goes back to the editing. I was like, I really thought it was ready for final edit. And nope. I feel like I need to go through it with a lice comb, and I'm finding lice, right? Like, I'm like, oh, not just combing it really well, but I'm like, oh, no, don't like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm not quite as far along as I had told myself or wanted to believe that I am. So, but just the next step is just keep combing. Right? That's me speaking on my journey. That's not the full answer to Leslie, your question, but I just want you to know that I'm there too. Garima or Stace checking in progress. etc.
Yeah, I'll go. So I'm about halfway through my final self-edit. I have a title, working title now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually starting to look like something. A couple of things that resonate with me about what is being said. Embarking on something new and being excited and passionate about it is a lot like drinking from the fire hose. And you can't. There's no way you're supposed to consume all the water being thrown at you. You have
Yeah,
to
it's
be
not a
very,
straw. Yeah.
no, you have to be very discerning about what you decide to take away and what is going to serve you at this time. And then take one small action in that direction. And through a bunch of small actions, you figure out you went somewhere. And so that's kind of what I had to learn, because as a lifelong overachiever slash recovering perfectionist, I wasn't used to that. And, the immediate gratification side of me rebels against all of that process. And you have to really find clarity in where you are. And sometimes it's easier to see where you're going than it is to see where you are.
Mhm.
And you have to really resonate with your part of the process. And the second thing that really is profound for me is, we are so familiar with our message
Yep.
that we write and speak as if everybody has the same level of familiarity with that message. And the example that comes to my mind is, if I say to anyone, including this group, okay, I want you to picture in your mind's eye, when you walk into your closet, what's the first outfit that you see? Well, that assumes a hell of a lot. I've just assumed you can walk into your closet. And I've just assumed that you have outfits that are already put together that you can just visibly look at.
And that you have a closet. Yeah.
And
Right.
if I'm an organizing specialist, oh, that's fantastic. But that's not who I'm trying to talk to. I'm trying to talk to people that need my message, that
And have a
need,
pile of dirty clothes on their floor. And the first outfit they see is the last thing they took off on a
and they're
pile of the
exer-
things that they've taken off for the
right.
last week.
As
Right.
I'm saying this, they're looking at their exercise bike that's draped in clothes.
Yeah. So
And
so I think you're bringing up a couple of really, really important pieces. Anybody here resonate with Stace's first point of like taking on a lot? And I'm in a program. I'm going to learn everything there is to learn, and I'm going to write my book tomorrow, right? There's resources. I'm going to binge resources and then have it all. Stace, I love that you shared this, because especially if we come in with something half written, if we come in, you came to me with like a manuscript, right? Right.
yeah, pretty much. It was pretty much what I considered a shitty manuscript. Yeah.
And can you lovingly to yourself, but also just for us, compare that with what you have now? What you
Oh,
came in with
absolutely.
and what you're
Absolutely.
working on now.
It was incredibly raw. And I had to allow myself the celebration of having something that developed,
Mhm.
even though it was very, very far from what I now have and what I would consider closer to a finished project. But I had convinced myself that it was pretty close to done,
Oh, sure.
and it just wasn't.
Yeah. But the second thing that you bring up, I think, is also really, really important, is in order to write something, we know something so much better than our audience does, which is the point It's why we're sharing it. It's why we're writing it. And two things I think happen. We don't know what we know that other people don't know. We become blind to our expertise. And I think what you were getting at is too, is like we're sharing stuff assuming A, B, or C, right? Which is where, and it's why we keep talking about who's your audience? Who's your audience? Who's your audience? And the more you know who your audience is, and then we take the quote that Jen shared. If we know who our audience is, we won't have this perfectly, but we're still aiming for it. It's like, how do we talk to them where they are?
Yeah, and one of the most important things that you told me very, very early in the process was the intention of this book is to move your reader from point A to point B. And I realized that I was quite obviously showing up and saying, look at point B.
Your whole
I
book
did
was
it.
point B, right? Like B's amazing. B's amazing. You should be B, right?
Right.
Which we
I
do because we're
wasn't
so excited about it.
exactly. I wasn't talking to anybody in point A. And they would have missed it. Had I continued on the path that I was continuing on, I wouldn't have been relatable because I was only talking to people that understood point B
Who
without
were
having
there already.
delivered them
Gosh.
from point A.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me because then I had to think, okay, what did I need to hear when I was in point A that I would have seen point B?
Yeah.
Or at least been interested in it.
That open to the possibility of point B.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was a really useful mental framing for me of my message. And it's a journey that you are taking a reader on.
Yeah.
And we all know point B. We are point B.
Yep.
Nobody else is. Nobody.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet.
And
Yeah.
and so in order to show anyone point B, you have to go back to the room of point A and open the door to point
Which
B.
is part of why writing is so hard emotionally. Like I did all this work to get the hell away from A, right? I don't want to go back there. I don't want to have to feel those struggles again, feel that loss. But this is why we keep talking about it. And this is what I meant when I said we're blind to our own knowledge. We don't realize how far we've come. We don't realize how much we've embraced B, to use this example, right? We are living, breathing, completely absorbed into this, right? Does that resonate with anybody? Can anyone be like, oh yeah, I see where I'm sharing something. It's super common for new authors to share something that's really inaccessible to their reader because we're sharing the destination. We're sharing the goal. And this is why we keep talking about who's your audience? What are they currently struggling with? If your answer to my audience is me 10 years ago, you're on the right track, right? It's some previous version of you. It's some iteration of what you were struggling with, what you didn't know. Jennifer, and I love your excavating, right? Your mind map keeps changing because you're like, what you want to share and what you want to focus on keeps changing, which is really phenomenal. I think maybe it's frustrating and not just be like mind map, outline, draft, done, right? Anybody want the like 4 steps and you're done? But the more that we struggle, the more that we learn, the more that we're aware of where we are and what we need to do to show up for our reader. In the beginning, and the first draft is always for us. No matter how well you do the outline, no matter how well you do the mind map, your first draft is still for you because it's a discovery process. It's an uncovering. Is that what I really think? Oh gosh, I really do have something valuable to share. Look how far I have come. Or, okay, look at all that stuff that I wrote down that is not going to make it into the final edit. That's okay. That's great. It got us there. what that feels like for me in my body is still an undercurrent of, I should have had this shit figured out already. I'm in a writing program. I'm sitting with writers. Shouldn't it just happen?
Or that you do already have it figured out. And our subconscious actually tries to reinforce that because it doesn't want to go back. You know, for nonfiction writers,
Yeah.
your audience, the hook for your audience many times is to find their pain point. Well, their pain point is your pain point, and your subconscious doesn't want to go back there.
Right. We did that. Well, and what I mean though is like I should have this figured out is the process of writing,
Yeah.
not the content or the process of how you got from your A to your B. You do have that to the point that most people don't see how far they've come. We get blind to all the struggles we've overcome because, to your point, we don't want to go back to those struggles because we overcame them and left them in the dust. Garima, you're here. I want to make sure that you have a chance to check in, see how things are going. Progress since the last time you were on a call.
Yeah, I think my thing is similar to Jennifer, where I did my mind map and I got really excited. But then when I went to kind of just outline or the deeper, I felt like I'm not ready for it. That's kind of not calling out to me. And that's what was calling out to me, as I mentioned in my early introduction, that I was trying to do two parallel projects on similar topic. One was fiction, one was nonfiction.
Yeah.
So the fiction thing was calling out to me more. Like I dream about it and I get up and have to kind of write it down, what I dreamed about. So I've decided to kind of, focus over there because that's coming to me vis-a-vis this nonfiction piece that I'm trying to write, like forcing myself and 5 words come out and then they don't feel, I don't know, any good. So it felt like maybe I've not really done the journey, as you said, like maybe I'm still at point A and not even fully understanding the point A. And I was trying to hurry up to point B. But clearly, I think I have to do the journey first before I
have it right here. I will say absolutely yes, and I will also say and. I think when we're writing, certainly there is a degree of like excitement and enthusiasm and like, I have energy for this. That's the thing that's calling you. It's the thing that's going to call you enough to do the hard stuff, because there's hard stuff, right? One of the things that I hear coming up in fiction all the time is, well, I can't write that because I haven't figured it all out yet. Anybody have the I'm not the expert in everything yet story somewhere in their head? We're talking A and B, but like haven't figured it all out. This is the first manuscript I ever wrote completely. I read this book every year. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I should do that. I should practice that. That's a great idea. Okay. I wrote it like 4 years ago. So it was still me figuring something out. And where am I? Am I at A? Am I at B? If I'm at B, I don't realize I'm at B and don't want to go back to A. Yes. And sometimes writing a book is how you figure something out. It's how you can move from A to B, right? Yes, have the planning. Yes, have a sense of what you're trying to figure out. My ideal reader for this is somebody who wants to have a better relationship with themselves. That's not, I have an imperfect, like I have a perfect relationship with myself and that's all I need. That's not a goal. It's somebody who's like in the yearning journey, right? And that made it gave me permission to write it without having everything figured out. But to your point, Garima, just listening to what lights you up is really important. There's a lot of dictatorial, I should be doing this, I have to do it that way. Like if it's not hard, I shouldn't be doing it. Right? But there's an energy that I find myself in sometimes. And when I notice, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing the right thing. and it very much feels like popping a pimple. Like, you know that there's something there and it's in process. And if you just squeeze hard enough, it'll work. Like, it'll come out. But if writing feels like trying to pop a teenage pimple, like it hurts to do, it's gross if you're successful. Some things are better left just to rest for a couple of days, metaphorically speaking. And if your story isn't just ready to like touch and pop, then it's not ready. If you find the pimple popping energy, then it's either time for rest or a different one of those parts of this creation process. Has anyone ever had that feeling? I mean, outside of like writing an essay for college, where you're like, I have to do this, I don't want to do this, and somehow you're proud of the process and the product at the end? Have you ever had I'm absolutely forcing myself to do this, I hate every part of it, and then you get to the destination and like, but I'm proud of it? Yeah. I usually,
Word products.
yeah, it's usually like poor process, poor product, it's done, but I hated every part of it. Right. And so I encourage you not to force yourself to do that, because if the process nor the product feel good, then sorry, what are we doing again? Why are we doing this? Because I want you to love both. Maybe not at exactly the same time, but at least, oh, I love the struggle of figuring this out. I love the angst of really trying to figure out how to say what I'm trying to say. I love that I thought I knew how to do this, and now I sort of don't know how to do this, but there's room for me to grow and improve, which is me sort of transitioning back to Leslie's editing question. But there's parts of this process that are wildly uncomfortable. They'll be slightly different for each of us, but this is an uncomfortable process. And it's through that discomfort that we become a different version of ourselves. We become stronger, we become clearer, we become authors. And it's the difference between becoming an author and just wanting to become an author, like sitting with that hard stuff, and what we learn and what we realize that we're capable of is super cool. So, but I also find that if we're doing just the hard stuff, makes it really hard to get to the end goal. Finding some of those slick spots, the path of least resistance, when it's fun, you're like, oh, it's just sort of coming, that's great. So being aware, and I love this 4-part creation process because it teaches us to be aware of like, am I doing the right task at the right time? Or am I really just forcing myself into something at this point? Does it make sense? Does that feel okay? I see a lot of furrowed brows and people are sort of thinking, that's okay. So the thing that I wanted to dive into today, you're on this call, so you get voting rights. I was going to talk about how you draft, right? Like how you draft best for you. Okay. Oh, and Rochelle, I celebrated your birthday, but then I maybe didn't give you enough time to talk. You want to talk? Sorry.
Oh, this is just going based on some of the things you were just saying. And also making me reflect on my past couple of weeks too, with balancing work and rewards. Yeah.
Any breakthroughs or progress, even if they're not quite breakthrough qualifying?
I was getting really strict on myself again, almost like I was being a strict parent to myself, and what that feels like in my body. Because I know I can work hard. I am a competitor and
Right.
and an entrepreneur. I'm very ambitious. I know I can do the work, but there was a point where I started to feel like I'm not having fun anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I just started to think like, how can I make this more fun? How can I do things that I want to do? Because I'm only doing things that I need to do.
Yeah. Eating all the stuff on your plate that doesn't taste any good and letting the stuff that you really want to eat get cold. And not always encouraging eat dessert first, but if the intention is to eat everything on your plate, what if it's fun? So I love that you bring that up. I think it's really important for us to become really self-aware in this process and recognize that it is a cyclical process. There are times where I just step back from my book for a month. And I absolutely have the capacity to beat myself up about that or acknowledge with the grace, okay, this is just needing some time to percolate. Da, 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 da. If I'm feeling like, oh gosh, I'm not giving myself enough time to do the work that I really want to do, then that shows me I need more planning. I need a little bit more structure. If I want more time, when and where and how am I going to do that? And so I've shown up in that space and like put 4 more writing blocks in my calendar to tease out more of those lice eggs, whatever they're called, nits, right? I want to get my edit to a place. I've said out loud, I think on this call and another call, I want to publish this thing in April. I need to get my shit together, right? And so I really, when am I being too gentle with myself and calling it going with the flow? And when am I being too strict on myself? And it's great. I love the parenting example. Like, you know what kind of parenting you need in any moment. Sometimes I'm like, okay, you need to clean your room. You can't watch Netflix until you clean your room. We can do that in our writing process too. But I've never successfully berated my daughter into doing something that she needs to do. That's maybe not the way. But I can talk to myself that way sometimes. So I love that you bring that up. Do we want to talk about the drafting phase, or is anybody properly in that phase? I heard Leslie bring up the editing, so I don't want to go off and talk about a phase. A lot of folks still feel sort of in the dreaming planning. But I'll definitely talk about editing because I know that's where Leslie is. Any strong feelings one way or another?
I feel like we can talk about it, and when I get there, I'll remember.
Okay, does that feel fair, Rochelle?
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that the drafting phase could be different for what I'm doing since I'm doing poetry.
Yep.
I wanted to know more of what you meant by that.
Okay, cool. Great. Leslie, I'm gonna walk through some drafting stuff and then get to editing. Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen real quick, just so that I have some visual representations and some references that you can come and look at another time when it is the right time for you. So in our community, there's the classroom, and then there's writing fundamentals, and then there's ideation, planning, and drafting. Okay. The goal, remember, at least in the beginning, is a shitty draft. But then I bring up this question of how do you draft best? And I genuinely ask the question because I don't have an answer for you specifically, and I don't even always have the same answer for myself. So I really encourage you with all the stages, but with this one in particular, is to play with it, to explore and find out what's going to work for you. And Rochelle, I love that you just brought this up again, because your book is part poetry and part prose, sort of explaining something. So like more how-to, more supportive self-help stuff, and then poetry, right? That's still the shape that you're going in. Great. The creation process of 2 different kinds of writing is probably different. And so even just like, how do I write poetry? How do I get into that space? Is it a different time, place? Do I light a different candle? What do I need in order to write poetry versus what do I need, or how do I communicate best this thing that's a little bit more logical, a little bit more linear? Yeah. Okay. I love your example because this is perfect. You may have 2 different recipes because you're doing 2 different things. So don't take it too seriously. Let it be a question rather than an always answer. Some of the ideas that come up and folks have really been successful with are as follows. Certainly, we really recommend that if you're at that point where you're like, I am going to sit down, I've figured out who my audience is, what my message is, what my A and B are, and I want to start fleshing this out, dive into that. Leslie talked about how important and helpful it was for her to have a really strong outline to help her with the drafting. Have a solid outline and a solid chapter format. That does not mean it cannot be changed. It means that you have mapped out a path for yourself. But then there's so many ways to write. And I know when I first started writing, I only gave myself one way to write. I only had one story of what was an acceptable way to write. You sit down at your computer and you type until you're done. And that was my only acceptable way because, unbeknownst to me, I had this blowhard of a European old man professor vibe in my writer space, thinking that to be a good writer, I need to be this kind of person. And I kept on sitting down and I was very disciplined. I would do exactly what I thought I was supposed to do. And the writing sucked. The process was uncomfortable and the product was bad. So we live in the 21st century. I love it. There are other ideas, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I do want you to consider some of these options. I take my notes on my Post-it. Get a voice to text transcription app of any kind. I use Otter. I do love it, and I brag about it all the time. Hit record, hit transcribe, and talk about what's in your outline. Just talk like you're talking to a student or to your ideal reader or to yourself 10 years ago or whoever you feel like you want to talk to. Okay. I did this for a full day. I sat on my balcony and I talked out the outline to my book. I might have sounded or looked like a crazy person, but I feel like everybody's now is just sort of talking to themselves with an earbud in their ear. So I look just like everybody else, but you're talking to nobody. That's one option. If doing that feels super weird, but I got 14,000 words out in a day. That's half my manuscript. Okay. It was shitty, but that was the whole point. I had rapid shitty progress. If talking it out to yourself feels weird, I picked this up from one of my favorite writers, and now I don't remember which one. I do believe it might have been Brene Brown. Ask a friend or a few friends over for the night for a glass of wine, a bottle of wine. I think she takes some friends after she's worked on some stuff away for the weekend. Okay. Explain to your friend what it is that you want to explain. Say, hey, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to bribe you with wine and cheese, and we are going to talk this thing through. I want you to listen to me. And then at the end, if there's questions, I want you to ask the questions. Transcribe the whole dang thing. Okay. And have it be a genuine conversation. If your goal is to have something that reads like not like word for word transcription of a conversation, but just a more friendly tone, then you might want to try that. Do be aware of whoever your inner critical writer is, whether it's your inner editor or just who you think you have to be in order to write well. I very much have a visual perception. I know exactly what color this man, it's a man, I know what color his corduroy jacket is. I know exactly who this inner writer is. And I also have an inner editor. When we know who they are, I want you to see if they're are they typing on the keyboard? Are they sitting behind you? Are they just like in a chair muttering about how it sucks? What's happening in your head and your energy around this space? And then you could also even ask yourself, if I had to give a speech, okay, if I had to give a talk on this chapter topic today, what would I say? I bring this up, it's super good for nonfiction because later on, you can take every chapter of your book and make it a keynote talk. You can use that same strategy moving in the creation process of it. Garima, for fiction, if I had to tell my child a story before bed, this is that scene, this is that chapter, I want to talk them through it. Okay. Before books even existed, humans sat around the fire at night telling stories. Right? We are story creatures. This is what we do. So tell it. What's the arc of this chapter? What happens? What are the characters? What are they thinking? What are they wearing? What are they feeling? What are they whatever? Okay. And then ask yourself, do you find flow? Do you find ease by talking about it? Do you find ease by writing by hand? Do you find ease by typing? I have admitted to you that when I sit down at a computer, I absolutely channel my European Freud person. Okay. I don't like spending a lot of time in that space. And so I have really tried to step back from it. But I was speaking to somebody else in our community who's a trained pianist. She loves typing. Typing feels like art and magic and flow for her. I was like, good. Well, then you should type. Right. And so I'm not sharing any of these things to say, this is the way to do it. It works for me and therefore it works for you. I want you to play. A friend of mine's a novelist. She will write her whole book out by hand in a notebook. She doesn't write it as it's read. She's just like, this is the scene I want to write today. And she just writes it out in her notebook. And then it gets transcribed into text and typed and all the things. And there you go. But when we're talking about how to draft, also, again, remember, what's the time of day? Where are you? Where in your week are you? What else is going on? Are you hormonal? Are you stressed out? Do you have a lot going on? Are you crazy busy? Are you trying to squeeze in a 45-minute writing block in between a million other things, right? So there's the how of the writing. And again, I call it drafting and not writing because I take my dog for a walk, voice to text, and here we are. We're drafting. I'm walking down the street, talking into my phone, AKA writing my book. So as you move into this drafting phase, I want you to play with it. Like, what if I light a fire in the middle of the night and then I make myself a sandwich and then I sit on the floor in front of the fire. Leslie, I'm geeking out on your fireplace right now. Like, and then I get blankets and I lie out there and I light a candle and I smoke a doobie and I then like make s'mores over the candle and then I write a chapter. And that's what I do, right? And writing a chapter for me right now looks like this. If you did that, I bet you anything, the underlying vibe of the chapter would have a different feeling than if you went to a coffee shop at 9 a.m. on a weekday. Right? And so it's a matter of how do you want to show up in the process? How do you want to show up on the page? And so play with it. Play with it. That makes sense for now for people? Does anybody have a very clear, like, oh shit, I know who my inner writer is? Any or anything that just comes up from that part before we move on to the editing? Okay. It's a lot. I challenge you to play. That's all. Okay. Does it feel okay to play, or do you feel like it's supposed to be good and strong and professional? I have to have my shit figured out.
I think if there's more play, if there's more fun, then it motivates us to do things.
And if the goal isn't to get it right, then it makes it actually, well, it doesn't have to be good, right? Like, have you ever watched a kid make a mud pie? That, right? Like, I'm sitting in the mud. Yes, I've got mud between my toes, and yes, it's creeping up my legs, but I'm going to pour water on this thing and I'm going to splash around. I'm going to get mud on my face. And it's amazing. A mud pie is amazing. Okay. I know how hard mud pie is, like the opposite for me of my inner writer. My inner writer
Oh, oops.
doesn't get dirty. Go ahead. No, there's no.
I was just gonna say, part of my manuscript was giving examples, personal ones of things that happened. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are really sad/funny. So I took, when I really needed like reward for writing all the, not so exciting stuff, I would just write that part, even if it wasn't in the right part of the book yet.
Exactly.
Because I'm like,
Yes.
gosh, I know I'm going to write this story. So I would just like, that was my, like, oh, I can't wait to finally put this in writing because it's been in me for so many years, So that was
Nice.
fun. And then I think they are fun to read that way.
Yeah.
So.
And I love that because you don't have to write in the order that anyone's going to read it. Right? Okay, I am going to write this hard bit. And when I do the thing that I said that I would do, guess what? I'm going to write this part that I cannot wait to write. Right? So there's lots of different kinds of rewards. I'm going to reward myself with writing this fun part. Love that. So the takeaway from this piece on writing is play. Play, see what happens, see how it feels. And Rochelle, I love that. If it's fun, guess what? You probably do more of it, right? If you can find that fun, easy, don't really care about the results vibe, then you can hit that goal of shitty first draft. That's why we have that goal instead of decent, good, enough-ish draft. That's not the goal. First is worst. Get it out and see what happens. Then we can edit, which brings us to Leslie's place. There are so many different kinds and styles and layers to editing. So I'm a very visual person. And so you probably will see this in how I present stuff. Let me show you again in the community revision. Okay. So again, with the shitty draft, we're not going to make it good. Like shitty to good is like 0 to 60. It's a little fast, right? When I edited, it's this book. I'm going to tell you this so that you don't have to do it this way. I probably edited this a total of 27 times. It's too many, okay? But I didn't have anybody helping me figure out what the different kinds of editing were, blah, blah, blah. I hired 3 different professional editors to edit it for me, which was really frustrating because I was like, I've already paid people to help me with this. Why does it still need to be, why am I doing this a 3rd time? Because I didn't have sort of a plan of attack. Nobody was helping me figure this out. So we start with a shitty first draft, and then there's self-editing. The self-edit, somebody came to me recently. I was like, oh, I'm ready for a developmental edit. I said, have you read through your manuscript? No, I haven't. I'm ready for you to read through it. And I was like, oh, honey bear. Like, no, sorry. I know that you want to be done and you want somebody else to make sense of what you think you've said, but that's not fair. It's not fair to ask anyone else to have their eyes first on my work for 2 reasons. One, it's terrifying to share your work with someone, super, super raw. So I want it to be a little bit better than that, but you're the only person who knows what it is that you're actually trying to say and who you're trying to say it to. And so the first edit should be definitely done by you. Leslie, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you've done a first self-edit before you even shared it with some peers for feedback, correct?
Not a super intentional one.
Okay.
Just kind of a once over real quick
Yeah.
to try to make sure there weren't a ton of typos, but there were still
Okay.
typos. So it was
Okay.
not,
Yeah, no.
it was not well done.
There will be extra typos. So the first read should always, I do this mostly for myself from emotional perspective of, I want to figure out what it is that I said, right? Some of my writing was very much like vomit. I'm like, what is that? I don't even remember eating that. Like, where did that come from? Right? Forgive the overly gross example. But what is it? I find this process really helpful, not just to keep me from embarrassing myself, but it's where I figure out what is it that I'm actually trying to say. And having drafted it, I get a little bit clearer. I read it. I always take a bit of time after writing to read it so that it seems a little fresh and it's not like, oh, I wrote it yesterday and I know exactly what I said. But I definitely have to wrestle it. I use the bread metaphor a lot, that your rough draft is like all the ingredients dumped into a bowl and stirred around, but it's like a sticky mess. That's your shitty draft. It's just dough. A self-edit, you're going to let it rise. You're going to knead it a little bit and make it better, incrementally better. Okay. 1% every day, 3% here, 2% there. When I was working on my draft on Friday, there were whole paragraphs. I was like, you know what? I've said this 3 or 4 times, but I also read my prologue and my introduction. I was 10 pages in and I hadn't said what the hell we were there to do. Teaching this 4-part creation methodology. Great. There's only so many pages somebody's going to stick with me to hear that someday I'm going to tell you about this thing. So I rearranged that and I was like, I don't want to make them wait longer than 3 pages. That's not fair. And it felt significantly better. So sometimes self-edit shows this sentence sucks. Sometimes it says, oh my gosh, I'm just dragging my feet and not letting the reader get what they need out of this process. After you've done a full self-edit of, if I were reading this, how does it land? Because that's what they'll get. They will get a book that doesn't change. Once it's in print, it doesn't really change. You'll feel differently about it. You'll have new thoughts, but what's in print stays in print. And so you read it as if you are the reader. And that will show you, oh, I need to say more on this. Oh, I need to say less on this, or I need this in a different order. And that's super, super helpful in that self-editing process. From a logistics standpoint, Leslie, I would even just assign yourself, like, I'm just going to read 1 chapter a day. I know you want to make more progress than that because I know you. You're like, I'm going to do 10 this week. Nope, 1 a day. 1 a day would be plenty. If you just sat down, snuggled up, I'm just going to read through this, read through it once, all the way through, take some notes, and then read through it again and be like, I want to change this, 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 and this. Right. And again, editing is, are you having it read to you? Are you printing it out and writing on paper? There's so many different ways to edit physically, logistically. They come up with different answers. I always have my work read out loud back to me by this monotone voice, because I find that really helpful. If I can have my story read to me like this, if I can listen to 7 chapters of Stace's manuscript like this and not absolutely want to jump off a cliff, but understand what is being said, then I know that the content is really good. It's rough, but it's super powerful. Then we do recommend peer edits, asking people, certain people, a few people, not very many, to give you very targeted feedback. I love this meme. One of my teammates sent it to me. This is how I feel about my book when I send it to the editor, and this is how I feel about my book when I get it back. But then even after a peer edit, the whole point is that you go back and do another self-edit. You integrate some of that feedback, not all of it. Don't give away all your authority. If somebody is like, oh, I think you should be writing about a different topic, you're like, well, that's great. You should go write that book. Thanks for your feedback. But if somebody says, and maybe confirm some of my doubts and fears about, yeah, it takes too long to get to the point, or like Stace's point earlier, you're talking as if I understand what you're talking about, but you haven't explained it enough, and I don't know what you're talking about. You're either using individual words I don't understand, which some people do. They use jargon, and all we have to do is, the first time we use a word, tell somebody what it means, and then they're on board. But if we do that a bunch, we sort of isolated our reader. So you have a peer edit, and then we recommend another self-edit. Then you can have a developmental edit and or a final edit, which final edit really is just the typos, the spaces, the commas. Okay. The final edit is copy and proof. Very rarely in a final edit, especially with us, will somebody come back and say, this really needs to get reworked because we're hoping that that's happened in a developmental edit stage. We're close to the top of the hour, but I didn't want to rush through that too fast. Leslie, did any of that help at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think I need to do what you're saying and just slow down my thought process.
Okay.
I think that's good advice. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, you've heard me even 2 or 3 times on this call. I'm like, yeah, I want it done. I want it done. But if that doesn't help me get it done well, and maybe get out of some of the other things that I'm causing, that are problematic for the whole process. If you had time and the energy in your day worked, like a chapter in the morning, and then go do something else, and then a chapter before your day is over, while you still have any energy and focus, would be as fast as I would recommend anybody really edit. Even internally, when our editors are working on manuscripts, we've learned now to set sort of limits of, yeah, please don't read that whole, like, don't edit that whole book in a day and a half, because we'll stop being good at it. We'll stop having that fresh perspective. We'll stop being good at it, and having that big picture and energy that we need. So, any last thoughts that you're going to take away from this call? Things that what did you get? Yeah, Angela, definitely, like, don't edit all in one day, especially if it's a book, right? A chapter that's a decent size, bite it off. What are your takeaways, key lessons for folks who are in the community but weren't on this call? What do you wish they knew? What are you glad that you picked up, you showed up for today's call? What nugget are you walking away with? Good. Don't do the whole thing on Friday. Spread it out. Spread the love. I ask for nuggets because it really helps. I actually take your nuggets and then tell everybody what they missed. But it also, I just want to plant that nugget. I'm mixing my metaphors.
I feel like I have more energy this week to focus on this because
Yeah.
I rested last week. I mean, that's important.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
here we go.
Perfect. And that whole, I mean, you came in with a story of, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. You did exactly what you needed to do, because this editing task is a different task. And so you have to come in locked and loaded and ready, emotionally and logistically. Good. The more we struggle, the more we learn. Gaudima, I love it. I know it really sells like faster and easier. Yes, but we're building muscle. Okay. I don't want to build muscle faster and easier. I want to do it a little bit at a time and be a strong badass at the end. So I love it. Any other takeaways? And then I'll just let everybody sign off and get on with their day. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. See you in the community. Reach out if you need anything. Ciao. Happy birthday, Rochelle.